Hi, I'm Brian Schroe from Beyondware. In this video, I'll show you how to make a neighborhood greenway by placing and editing 3D assets, using some section label overrides, and incorporating some of our new traffic stopping features to show traffic slowing over a speed hump. Let's check it out. So another example project I've been wanting to make is a neighborhood greenway. These are generally some low volume, low speed roads that are kind of shared between bikes and cars. They don't necessarily have a dedicated bike lane because there's not enough conflict on the road to do that. So I'm going to use some of our assets in Beyond Typicals to show that residential neighborhood with a shared space between bikes and cars. So let's get started. We'll start with a new blank project. We'll add in a couple of lanes. And I don't, in this project, want to use the shared lane. That's mostly because I want to represent a road where bikes are moving separate, kind of aligned differently than the cars. So I don't want these bikes running down the middle of that lane. I also want to show a difference in speed between the bikes and cars. And I'll show you how we can use a speed hump just across the car lanes and avoid those bike lanes so it's a little more comfortable ride for cyclists. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is put in 2 lanes of traffic for a low speed road. And because it's low speed, I will knock this down to 20 miles an hour. We'll keep that volume pretty low, but I will juice it up just a little bit. And let's see, now I'm going to want to add in my on-street bike lanes. And again, these aren't necessarily dedicated bike lanes on road. They're more of a shared space in the overall pavement. So I'm going to go ahead and show this all as a unmarked shared space here. And I'll do that by adjusting our textures. So we've got our asphalt. Let's go with asphalt nowhere since we don't get a lot of traffic. So we'll go ahead and change that. And then, like I said, we're not going to have our dedicated striping. Ooh, I just saw that semi-truck. That reminded me I'm going to want to change the volume as well, or the vehicle type. So let's pull out some of those larger vehicles from that traffic. Okay, and then for these shared lanes, generally you'll find that the bike and lane width combined is 14 feet. So for this case, I'm going to leave the bike lane at 5 and make this common lane 9. And what we'll see is things start to tighten up a little bit. And since we have those smaller vehicles, they do fit comfortably in a 9-foot wide lane. I also want that shared lane marking that comes in the shared lane option. I like this on the road, but instead of putting bike lane markings here, I'm going to want to show a shared lane marking on that part of the road, just like so. Then we can throw some curb and gutter on the outside. So I'll use our gutter and curb. And I want to flip this curb. I see a stripe there. Let's get rid of those. And now I want to place our speed hump down the middle of this road to really show that low speed nature of the road. So I'm going to go ahead. I think I've got a filter on. Yep, for decals. If I just type in speed, I think I'll get speed hump or bump. There we go, speed bump long. So I'm going to toggle on common lane so I can place it in the middle of that, and then go to my asset placement to toggle on the speed bump long, and we'll put that here. Now, the way they do these sometimes on these neighborhood greenways is they won't place the speed hump in the bike lane. They'll just kind of build it in the middle of the road. So that's what I'm going to try to do here, is place it there, and then I can go ahead and scale that down to represent a narrower speed hump. If they do stretch across the road on these, sometimes they'll be what they call sinusoidal, so they wouldn't be as sharp of an incline and decline on the beginning of end, so it's a little more bike friendly. And you'll see, because that's a raised element, these tires are running through that speed bump, but if we were to look at it from above, it might look a little more realistic there, so adjust your camera view accordingly. And now I want to capture the residential nature of this. So I'm going to go find our driveway assets. And I know we've got plenty of users that have had some difficulty appropriately implementing these into our sections, just because they don't perfectly align with some of our residential buildings, and there's some limited customization here, but I'll show you how we can play with some of those settings to make this look a little more realistic. One thing I will note is that it looks like this driveway already has a curb built into it, so I'll just go ahead and delete my curb out of this section. If you're getting real nitpicky, you see that this curb extends down a little bit, so for our pro users, you can go ahead and change that texture to match the depth of your curb and gutter. Here we go. Now let's try to build some single family residential homes on the outside of this, and we'll show how we can make a realistic looking driveway using those buildings and some placed sidewalk assets. So we've got our small buildings. Let's change this to single family. You can see that the front of these buildings have more of a porch and front door, but the back of these do have a driveway, so we can use that to our advantage. I don't think this looks terribly realistic, and we definitely are missing some sidewalk here, so I'm going to play with a couple of things here to show that a little bit better. First, I'm going to change this texture here to grass, like so. We will need to adjust the height of our building, and I'll go ahead. Actually, I think if I add in sidewalk, we'll accommodate that. There we go. So we may want to raise up our other sections to match that. So I'll go ahead and do that for all of these. An easy way to do that is to grab them out of the section hierarchy. You can hold Control and grab multiple sections at a time. Let's get all of these, and we will slowly raise these up. Looks like 0.1, maybe 0.2 gets us up to that elevation. There we go. And then I also want more of a driveway beyond the sidewalk here. Maybe I'll duplicate the sidewalk just to get pedestrians moving in both directions. And because it's a neighborhood greenway, we'll probably want to pull that volume up a little bit. Generally, there's not 12 feet of sidewalk, so I'll go ahead and knock these both down to 3 for something a little more realistic. So we've got a total of 6 feet with plenty of pedestrians moving up and down that sidewalk. And then I basically want to create a longer stretch of driveway between the sidewalk and the garage door. So here's what I'm going to do. First is I'm going to widen this pad out for the single family home. Let's go with 80. That looks fine. And now I'm going to use, similar to the raised crosswalk example project that I created, I'm going to put in a placed 3D asset of a sidewalk square and size it to fit these driveways. Then we can play with maybe the scale of the houses or the offsets and spacing to really line those up with this driveway opening in the segment. So now I've got the sidewalk standard toggled on to be placed in the building small section. So I now can go to the building small, select sidewalk standard, and plop one down. And again, I'm going to try to align it to my driveway opening, not necessarily the garage doors, because we can change the spacing and scale of those houses after the fact. And I'm going to want 2 of them, so I'm going to put those in place. And now I'm going to edit the scale and height of those so that they sit flush and line up between the driveway and the garage door. Okay, so I've noticed, it's pretty narrow. We've got to get a lot wider for that driveway to look realistic. So I think what I'm going to need to do is actually, you can see, so our driveways, these assets don't have the customization of scaling and spacing, at least for now. So for now, what I'm going to do is lengthen the section to try to make those a size that looks a little more realistic comparatively to the opening of the garage door. So let's try to eyeball this here. We can always clean it up later. So it looks like maybe 130 might be about the right size. And again, I can use my sidewalk square to, I can move it and use it to kind of get a good idea for what we need to do with these houses. So let's go ahead and try to line that up. That looks pretty good. I can take this house now, this single family building section, and space that out so I can adjust the spacing up there so you can see that house moving along in line. I can also adjust the longitudinal offset to get that to line up a little bit better. If it's close but not quite perfect, we can always adjust the house a little bit. I would suggest trying to stay away from scaling your houses too drastically, lest they not look realistic anymore. But we've got some cleanup we can do here too. So there we go. Now we've got a couple of driveways that look realistic. I do want to narrow this up just a little bit. Let's go to 6 feet for a boulevard and driveway flare. And then we can do the same on the other side of the road. Okay, now we've got our driveways, we've got our road. I'm going to add some trees and other vegetation to make this look a little bit more realistic. I'll note, instead of going to individual vegetations and toggling on building small, I'll show you, you can also click on this little icon in the section palette. And what that's going to do is bring up all the available assets that we can then toggle on to. So now by doing this, I can go ahead and select a whole bunch of trees and other vegetation to bring into this asset. There we go. We've got a little bit more realistic setting with some shrubbery and trees. We can tone that down as we need to, but just try to get a little bit of aesthetically pleasing elements into here. You'll notice I put a lot of this vegetation into this small building section, but I was clicking within the driveways. So as a user, I might get a little lost if I want to go and delete these later on or make edits to them. I would look in the driveway at asset placement and find that there are none. A good way to check that is the section hierarchy. You can see that where I've got placed assets in these sections, it's indicating which sections have them. So this building small has this asset icon right now because I placed those sidewalk squares. Our common lane over here has the asset for the speed bump, and then the rest of those assets for vegetation are here on this building small. So I can go, this section hierarchy just gives you a little bit more information as to which sections have assets placed in case you need to come back and edit or remove those later. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more vegetation to this and maybe a couple other elements, and then we'll call it good. All right, now I will finally show you some label manipulation here. So you see we've got some, because we duplicated our sidewalks, those labels are kind of competing for space in the model. We might also want to indicate that this is a shared lane, even though it's two components. So I'll show you a few different label options to help round out this model here. For instance, one thing I don't want is labels on my buildings. I just don't want that stem out there. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the vertical leader lines for those off. You can see the label for those buildings is already turned off by default. Now for these sidewalks, we can use a couple label overrides. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the label and stem for one of the two sidewalk elements here. And I'm going to do the same over here. I'll do it for the inside sidewalk for both of those. Now I can use some overrides here to help show that use this one sidewalk label for both of these sidewalks. In the section label auto section, we can scroll toward the bottom and we have an override dimension. So you see when I toggle that on, that 3 foot goes away. I know this is 6, so I can go ahead and type 6 in there. And when I click away, that 6 populates. I'll do the same over here. Override dimension 6. There we go. And now I don't want this stem running down the middle, so I'm going to turn off vertical leader lines for that sidewalk as well. And then I want this 6 foot sidewalk label to center over the top of those, so I can use the horizontal alignment of the label and slide that over. By putting that to 1, it's going to hover that center of that label over the right side of that, which is the center line, so that's perfect. And then I'm going to do the same for this sidewalk over here, turn off that stem, and move that label to the left. All right, and similarly, we're going to adjust the travel lanes here. So I want to show this common lane is a 14-foot wide shared lane. So what I can do is override this section name here and call this a shared lane. And then I can turn off my bike lane labels in the section label auto menu. So turn off label, turn off vertical leader line. And for this shared lane, I'm going to also turn that leader line off, which is on the left side here, so that I don't see that. And I can slide this label over the center of that lane and override the dimension, like so. Oops. I'll do the same on this side. Now you'll see that because I wanted to use those label overrides, that I'm missing some stems here. Maybe I want to indicate this left edge, but since I turned the leader lines off for this element, those are gone. There is a nice little workaround that we've got for that. If you go to our invisible section all the way at the bottom, and you use it for nothing other than this, it's still useful. So what you can do is place an invisible section. You'll see it comes with no elements in it. It creates a gap in your model. But if we knock that width down to 0, we will have that stem back. And that's the only purpose that invisible section will be serving. So we can do that over here as well. And now we've created our outer leader lines for those outer dimensions. One thing I thought of as I was trying to button this up was using our new traffic features to place a stop bar that might slow down these cars as they approach the speed hump. and this could be a bit tricky, but I think we have the power to do that. So you'll see we've got our stop bar, the visualizer right now on, so we can see where that stop bar is. When we cut the video, we can look at turning that off before we cut the video. Essentially what I want to do is time this stop sign in these traffic settings so that the cars will slow down as they approach the speed hump, and then have that basically the green light turn on, that stop sign go away, so they'll advance through it. I think I'll be able to do that by making these stages really short, and we might see those cars slow down and maybe not come to a full stop as they approach this. So I'll play around with these settings and see if we can get this to work. Okay, so I wanted to make a couple of final notes here. You'll see I changed the environment background to a little bit of a green hue just to kind of have that subtle neighborhood greenway aspect to it. Another thing I wanted to show you was the stop bars that I ended up manipulating here. So if I go into our traffic settings, you'll see I've got some stop bars on. I played around with the stop bar timing group, as well as some of the advanced settings like this stop distance multiplier to kind of hone down the available length that a car would stop, so we make sure we're not getting any stopping action. I'll show you where those stop bars ended up. We've got our global override show stop bar settings here, so they're just a little bit advanced beyond that speed hump, and then with some quick timings here, there we are. You'll see we've got some short timings that are advancing those cars over that speed hump. So I think that'll, as it's preset, would load up on your example project as well, but feel free to play around with some of these stage lengths or the stop bar timing group to see if you can get this similar action of cars slowing down over the speed hump. Another thing I'll note is you'll see we've got these shared lane markings here. I'm going to turn off my stop bar override here. Let's say I want those a little bit closer to the middle of the segment. At the bottom of this section dialog, we have the ability to tug those in. So I think like a 0.75 looks kind of nice. So I'll pull those in. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, this asset here is three-dimensional, and you can see those tires disappear through there. One tweak we could make, it's a visual preference thing, but if maybe it looks better to take that Z scale down on this speed hump, we can do that as well. So I had it proportionally scaled. I could change this Z scale to really flatten that out, and that way we're not getting as big of a effect of the tires tracking through that element. So you see by scaling that down, the element still looks three-dimensional. We still see some of the shadows and texture differential between there, but maybe that when we cut a video or show this to a client, it looks a little more realistic because we're not seeing those tires disappear through that asset. So just a couple of cosmetic tweaks, plus where we ended up on the traffic settings to get that kind of slow down action over the speed hump. So feel free to test it out yourself, dive in, and hopefully this expands your use of Beyond Typicals. As always, feel free to find out more at www.beyondware.com. Feel free to reach out to me too at brian@beyondware.com. Thanks for watching.